The $1.75 app. Nobody wanted. The Quibi catastrophe. In the annals of Silicon Valley failures, few stories are as spectacular as the rise and fall of Quibi. Picture this. Two Hollywood titans, armed with the largest startup funding round in entertainment history, convinced they could revolutionize how people consume content by creating shows specifically designed for vertical phone viewing. Jeffrey Katzenberg, the former Disney executive who helped create The Lion King and co-founded DreamWorks, teamed up with Meg Whitman, the former CEO of eBay and HP, to launch what they believed would be the Netflix of mobile. They raised an unprecedented $1.75 billion from investors, including Goldman Sachs, JP Chase, and virtually every major Hollywood studio. The concept seemed simple enough. Premium short-form content, each episode lasting 10 minutes or less, optimized for mobile viewing during those brief moments when people are waiting in line, commuting, or taking a break. They called it quick bites of entertainment, hence Quibi. What followed was one of the most expensive and public failures in startup history, a cautionary tale about what happens when industry veterans mistake their intuition for market research and assume that throwing money at a problem will make it disappear. The genesis of Quibi can be traced back to Jeffrey Katzenberg's obsession with mobile-first content consumption. In 2017, he began pitching what he initially called New TV to anyone who would listen, convinced that the future of entertainment lay in premium short-form content designed specifically for smartphones. Katzenberg's thesis was deceptively simple. People spend hours on their phones consuming low-quality content on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, so surely there was a market for high production value content in the same bite-sized format. He enlisted Meg Whitman as CEO in 2018, bringing her operational expertise and Silicon Valley credibility to complement his Hollywood connections. Together, they embarked on what would become the most aggressive fundraising campaign in entertainment startup history. By the time they officially launched in April 2020, they had secured $1.75 billion across 2 funding rounds, with investors including Disney, NBC Universal, Sony Pictures, Viacom CBS, Fox, Warner Brothers, and financial giants like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. The company had burned through approximately $1.4 billion before even launching, spending lavishly on content creation, technology development, and marketing. They signed deals with A-list talent, including Jennifer Lopez, Chrissy Teigen, LeBron James, and Liam Hemsworth, paying premium rates for content that would live exclusively on their platform. Quibi's content strategy was built around 2 fundamental assumptions that would prove to be catastrophically wrong. First, they believed that consumers wanted premium, professionally produced content in short formats, essentially trying to create the HBO of 10-minute shows. Second, they were convinced that vertical video was the future of entertainment consumption, developing proprietary technology called Turnstyle that allowed viewers to seamlessly rotate their phones between portrait and landscape modes without interrupting the viewing experience. They invested hundreds of millions in original programming across 3 categories: scripted series, unscripted and documentary content, and daily news and entertainment shows. The scripted content included big-budget productions like The Golden Arm, starring Mary Louise Parker, Survive with Sophie Turner, and Most Dangerous Game, featuring Liam Hemsworth and Christoph Waltz. Their unscripted slate featured shows like Chrissy's Court, with Chrissy Teigen, Thanks a Million, with Jennifer Lopez, and I Promise, following LeBron James's school in Akron. They also launched daily shows including news programming and lifestyle content designed to drive habitual daily usage. The production values were undeniably high, with budgets that rivaled traditional television shows despite the shortened format. However, this premium approach came with premium costs, and they were essentially creating television-quality content for a mobile-first platform that consumers weren't yet convinced they needed. The timing of Quibi's launch could not have been worse, though ironically, it initially seemed perfect. The app launched on April 6, 2020, just as COVID-19 lockdowns were taking effect across the United States. While this meant millions of people were suddenly stuck at home with more time to consume content than ever before, it also fundamentally undermined Quibi's core value proposition. The entire platform had been designed for in-between moments, those brief periods when people were commuting, waiting in line, or taking quick breaks from their busy lives. Suddenly, nobody was commuting, standing in lines, or living the busy mobile lifestyle that Quibi was built to serve. Instead, people were working from home, often with large screens readily available, making the appeal of vertical phone video even less compelling. The company had spent years and hundreds of millions of dollars optimizing for a use case that had temporarily disappeared from most people's lives. Despite the challenging circumstances, Quibi managed to generate some initial buzz, reaching 1.7 million downloads in its first week and eventually hitting 5.6 million downloads within its first month. However, these numbers were misleading because they were heavily inflated by an aggressive promotional campaign that offered 90-day free trials, meaning most users weren't actually paying for the service. The fundamental problems with Quibi's product became apparent almost immediately after launch. Despite spending over $100 million on marketing and having some of the biggest names in entertainment promoting their content, user engagement was disastrously low. While they achieved 5.6 million downloads in the first month, internal metrics showed that user retention was abysmal, with most people trying the app once or twice and then never returning. The content, despite its high production values, failed to generate any cultural buzz or social media conversation. Unlike successful streaming platforms that create water cooler moments and viral content, Quibi's shows seem to disappear into the digital ether without leaving any cultural footprint. The 10-minute format, which seemed logical in theory, proved problematic in practice. Too long for the quick dopamine hits that platforms like TikTok provided, but too short to develop the kind of compelling narratives that keep viewers coming back for more. The vertical video format, despite the innovative Turnstyle technology, felt gimmicky rather than revolutionary, and many users found it annoying rather than convenient. Perhaps most damaging of all, the content wasn't shareable on other social media platforms, meaning Quibi missed out on the organic viral marketing that drives growth for most modern entertainment platforms. In an era where shows succeed or fail based on their ability to generate memes, clips, and social media discussion, Quibi's walled garden approach was strategically disastrous. Behind the scenes, Quibi was burning through cash at an unprecedented rate while struggling to find its audience. The company was spending approximately $8 million per month just on office rent for their Beverly Hills headquarters, a lavish space that reflected Katzenberg and Whitman's corporate sensibilities but seemed tone-deaf given the startup's mobile-first mission. Their content budget was equally extravagant, with some reports suggesting they were spending over $6 million per hour of content produced, a figure that made even Netflix's notoriously high spending seem conservative. By July 2020, just 3 months after launch, internal documents showed that paid subscriptions were far below projections, with fewer than 500,000 users converting from the free trial to the paid tier. The company had projected they would have 7.4 million subscribers by the end of their first year, but they weren't even close to 10% of that target after several months in market. Advertising revenue, which was supposed to be a major pillar of their business model, was also severely underperforming as brands were reluctant to invest heavily in a platform with such low engagement numbers. Despite having some of the most experienced executives in entertainment and technology, Quibi seemed unable to diagnose why their product wasn't resonating with consumers, instead doubling down on their original strategy and blaming external factors like the pandemic for their struggles. As user growth stagnated and cash reserves dwindled, Quibi began making desperate pivots that only highlighted how fundamentally flawed their original assumptions had been. In May 2020, just 1 month after launch, they announced they were exploring adding a casting feature that would allow users to watch content on their televisions, essentially admitting that their mobile-first strategy wasn't working. This move was particularly striking because it contradicted everything Katzenberg had been saying about the future of mobile entertainment for the previous 3 years. In September, they made an even more dramatic reversal, announcing that they would make their content shareable on other social media platforms, abandoning the walled garden approach that had been central to their strategy. They also began offering annual subscriptions at heavily discounted rates, a move that generated some short-term cash but suggested they were getting desperate for any sign of user engagement. Perhaps most tellingly, they started licensing some of their content to other platforms, essentially admitting that their distribution strategy had failed. These pivots might have made sense for a scrappy startup trying to find product-market fit, but for a company that had raised $1.75 billion specifically to execute on a very particular vision, They looked like admissions of fundamental strategic failure. Each change undermined their credibility with both investors and the few users they had managed to attract. The end came swiftly and brutally for Quibi, with the company shuttering operations just 6 months after launch, despite having hundreds of millions of dollars still in the bank. On October 21, 2020, Katzenberg and Whitman announced they were closing down the platform, making it one of the shortest-lived major streaming services in history. The decision shocked the entertainment industry, not because Quibi was succeeding, but because most observers expected the company to continue burning money while trying to find a sustainable path forward. Instead, the executives made the rare decision to shut down while they still had capital remaining, allowing them to return approximately $350 million to investors. This meant that in just 6 months, they had burned through nearly $1.4 billion with almost nothing to show for it, except a library of content that few people had watched and even fewer cared about. The announcement came just 2 days after reports surfaced that they had been exploring strategic alternatives, including a potential sale to companies like NBC Universal or Facebook, none of which materialized. In their farewell letter to employees and investors, Katzenberg and Whitman blamed the failure on COVID-19 and their inability to raise additional funding, though most industry observers pointed to fundamental product and strategy problems rather than external circumstances. The post-mortem on Quibi's failure reveals a masterclass in how experienced executives can spectacularly misread market demand and consumer behavior. The company's demise can be attributed to several critical strategic errors, starting with their fundamental misunderstanding of why people consume short-form content. Platforms like TikTok and Instagram succeed because they provide endless, algorithmically driven streams of content that users can passively consume, not because people specifically want premium 10-minute episodes of scripted television. Quibi's assumption that consumers would pay a monthly subscription fee for short-form content ignored the reality that most successful short-form platforms are either free or ad-supported. Their decision to focus exclusively on mobile viewing in an era when people increasingly want flexibility in how and where they consume content showed a fundamental misunderstanding of consumer preferences. The vertical video format, while technically impressive, solved a problem that most people didn't know they had, and the inability to share content made it nearly impossible for shows to gain organic traction. Perhaps most damaging of all was their decision to launch with a subscription-only model in a market where consumers were already overwhelmed with streaming options and increasingly selective about new entertainment expenses. The failure wasn't just about bad timing due to COVID-19. It was about a product that nobody had asked for, created by executives who confused their own preferences with market demand. Industry analysts estimated that Quibi's cost per acquired user was over $3,000, making it one of the most expensive customer acquisition disasters in startup history. The company's library of content was eventually sold to Roku for less than $100 million, a fraction of what it cost to produce, providing a final indignity to one of the most expensive failures in entertainment history. The legacy of Quibi serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of raising too much money too early, the importance of validating market demand before building products, and the risks of letting industry experience substitute for customer research. Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman were undoubtedly accomplished executives with impressive track records, but their expertise in traditional media and e-commerce didn't translate to understanding mobile-first entertainment consumption. Their ability to raise $1.75 billion actually worked against them, allowing them to build an expensive product without ever proving there was real demand for what they were creating. The failure highlighted how different mobile entertainment is from traditional television and how difficult it can be for established industry players to successfully navigate new platforms and consumer behaviors. Quibi's collapse also demonstrated the importance of cultural relevance in modern entertainment. Despite having A-list talent and high production values, they failed to create content that people wanted to talk about, share, or recommend to friends. The company's unwillingness to pivot quickly when early metrics showed problems suggested an organizational culture that was too confident in its initial assumptions and too slow to adapt to market feedback. For investors, the Quibi debacle serves as a reminder that even the most experienced management teams can fail spectacularly when they lose touch with consumer demand, and that sometimes the biggest risk is not external competition, but internal blindness to market realities. In the end, Quibi will be remembered not for revolutionizing mobile entertainment, but for proving that in the digital age, no amount of money, talent, or industry experience can substitute for building something that people actually want to use.